your ship at on the day of Pearl Harbor? How did you get there?
Well, I was on this ship for assignment, like to build that for the United States, to build an air base at Canton Island, then to Palmyra Island, and then back to Pearl Harbor. We left Pearl Harbor on the 1st of November, 41, and we got into Pearl Harbor that morning at 5:30. But because when we were down to Canton Island and the talks in Washington weren't going very well, and the Antares didn't have any armament on it. See, it was a stores issue ship. It was like a big department store. Go from island to island, those little islands that we controlled in the Pacific, it couldn't get the things they needed, you know, to eat and to sell and ship service, you know, and playground equipment and medicine and movies. That's what this ship done. It went from one to the other, and they'd switch movies from one to the other, you know, go back and forth. But it was that's how we got back to Pearl Harbor. Let's see.
So you entered the harbor early morning, December 7th.
December 7th, about 5:30. But what I was going to say is the Commodore had him put on a submarine watch because we didn't have any armament. But what they done was they said we were at Canton Island, you know, it's about halfway to Australia. They sent the destroyer, the USS Selfridge, down there to escort us back. The Selfridge come down to Canton, and we left Canton on the 27th of November, we left Canton. And then they sent us to Palmyra Island to pick up a tow. Well, the Selfridge was the latest model destroyer, and they had sonar equipment, and they'd keep their sonar on, and they picked up the sub following us. And they asked for identification, and they wouldn't give us any, so you assume it's Japanese. And so we got to Palmyra Island, and then we picked up a tow, and that sub still followed us. And Selfridge what they'd do is sound for them, and when they'd hear them, then they'd ask us to shut off our engines, you know. Then they'd circle real fast around us to try to pick up where the location in the water the sub was. Then the sub would stop. So we done that all the way back to Pearl Harbor. Well, about 150 miles out, the Selfridge run short of fuel and food. So they asked permission to go in. They granted permission to go in because there wasn't much else they could do unless they brought it out to them. And so they figured that PBYs at the Naval Air Station there would be able to cover that. Well, when they left, then later the destroyer Ward, Porter, picked up that sub again. And they asked permission from Kimmel to sink it. And Kimmel says, no, you can't do it. We have to wait till somebody strikes us. But we had the Commodore ordered submarine watch, fore and aft, port and starboard. Well, that morning, at about 10 after 6, they reported an object on about 1,500 feet on the port starboard side of the ship. And what it was the submarine started to emerge from the water, and their conning tower showed. So the Navy, the Antares notified the Navy Yard. The Navy Yard notified the Ward that was on duty at the gate. And we watched now. Now this was it was a pretty morning, you know, but earlier though, about 4 in the evening, the minesweeper Condor was out there, and they spotted a periscope going through the water, headed toward the gate. So they notified the Ward that was on duty out there, but the duty officer on there was a young officer, never been on a ship before, never had charged of a ship before. He went in the wrong direction to start with, but he went out by where the Ward reported it, or the Condor reported it, and so it wasn't nothing there. So he never reported it. That was the biggest mistake of that day. He never reported. He should have reported even that it was reported instead, but he never did. If that would have been known, the good chances are they'd have called General Quarters when we did. Have at your armed station, if your ship's at war. See, the Navy, most of the ships were all armed, you know, but their ammunition couldn't be around the guns. They had to be in somewhere below decks, you know. So no armor, no ammunition was by any gun. And then when they had the excitement and the things that happened, why sometimes they had to break open the places to get in. You know, everything wasn't where it should have been.
So here you are on December 7th, and the attack hasn't started yet, but your ship is right in the harbor.
Well, we were outside the harbor, but see, everything went wrong that morning. We were supposed to have a tug come out and take that off, but it was an hour late. Now, see, so many things happened that shouldn't have happened. And the consensus was that, you know, if you look at the Japanese, the way they did that, it was 100% successful in everything except those 5 submarines. They didn't do any damage. And if you have to look at it in different ways. If the Antares, by sighting that, if that didn't save a much more serious situation. For instance, if we hadn't have spotted that submarine, that one, you know, what might have happened? We were the only ships due in that morning. The consensus is that they would have sunk our ship in the harbor. That was our purpose, you know. If they sunk a ship in the harbor, nothing could get out. Even a battleship couldn't get out, you know. They might try it, but, you know, they'd damage it. But we watched it. We watched the Ward go over there, and we was all on deck. Anybody didn't have duty was on deck. We watched it, but, you know, it's a pretty Sunday morning. The ships were playing, our ship was playing music on the intercom, beautiful Hawaiian music. There's nothing to get scared about. You know, inside the harbor on Sunday morning, they had a simulated dive bombing attack. And what they do is drop flour sacks on the old battleship, the Utah. And so we just assumed, since they didn't, we assumed that was our defensive maneuvers out there. We didn't know anything. Nobody knew they had little submarines that could get in there. Our government didn't know it, you know, or at least we don't think they did.
Were these the single-man submarines that you...
Single man, but they'd have 2 subs. They were listed for 2, but they were mostly manned by single. They had 2 torpedoes.
So what do you remember, when you were up on deck and looking out that beautiful morning, What ships did you see? What do you remember?
No ships you could see now because I don't always looking with watching over. Well, you know, when you've been to sea for 37 days, you look at everything on the land. Because it's still early. See, 6 o'clock is still, that time of year is still dark. Not dark, but, well, that Japanese picked a full moon night, see. They had everything planned right down to the T. So we after that, well, when the Ward was dropping depth charges, we also had a PBY plane over the top dropping depth charges. But first they were dropping flares. You know, from up above they could see below the water. So the Ward had help of finding where they were. But
when did you realize that this was not an exercise, but it was a real war?
Not until the music was playing and gone, and we could see the planes. And my best buddy was talking to him, and he says, well, "What is it? What is it? What is it?" I says, "Well, I don't know, but they're not our planes. They were too far away to tell what they were, but you could see them diving in and out, and then we were too far away to hear the explosions, but we could see the smoke coming up. And they wouldn't let us in the harbor because then they was afraid that the sub would get us. Because by this time, then they knew there was at least one there. But so well, what I was going to say is that we still hadn't had our tow relieved, and you can't park when you're that way. You have to keep moving. After the music then was playing, then all of a sudden, and the first time we knew it was they broke in the radio station and said, "This is an air raid, take cover." They just kept saying that. That's the first time we knew there was any attack there. But of course the people inside the harbor were under it, so they knew it, you know. So the Japs come back a little after 9 o'clock again. And this time it was just high-level bombing. And we were just, we'd got rid of the tow and that, but they wouldn't let us go into the harbor because they didn't know how many subs there were or anything about it. And so then our Commodore decided that we'd tie up in Honolulu. Now we were zigzagging outside, you know, because there was high-level bombing. And then there was 8 of us up on the bow of the ship watching what looked to be a dogfight. And then all of a sudden you could hear the plane close, and it was a Japanese Zero. And somebody yelled, "Jap Zero, Jap Zero." About that time they opened fire. But we hit the deck, but they were shooting at the bridge. And we had some damage to the radio shack, some damage on the bridge, but it didn't hit it. No bullet hit anybody. We didn't have any casualties. I think when it was done, one guy got the Purple Heart, but they didn't know ever how he got it done, how he got hurt. So we went in and tied up, and then nightfall come, and during the night you could hear shooting. And of course, you know, you hear stories that you don't know how, even in a place like that the Japanese had landed at Nanakuli, they landed at Porter's, at Waikiki, and 2 other places they said they'd landed. But
so a lot of rumors going on.
yeah, but what it was they called for blackout because of the bombing, you know. And if somebody didn't turn out the lights, they'd just shoot them out, you know. outside lights, you know. So it was kind of, I don't think anybody slept that night. Then the next morning at 8 o'clock, I got a telegram from the Red Cross that my brother was in the hospital. But the Commodore had his own Jeep, and he had a driver. He said, "I suppose you'd like to see him." And I said, "Yeah." And he had his orderly go tell him to get ready. He took me over to Pearl Harbor, and on the way out, it was the Marines had built foxholes out of sandbags. He was facing submarines gun, machine guns, and we was flying the Commodore's flag. But the worst part of Pearl Harbor for me was my brother. I got there. My brother wasn't a bed patient. He was an up patient. They had him up carrying casualties in and out. There was so many of the casualties were burns. They dropping fire bombs and what happens when those flash bombs, if anything that's covered is all right, but anything that isn't is going to burn you. So most of the casualties were that, and the smell was awful, plus the smell of the oil burning in the water, still floating around, some of them in the water floating around with fire on them.
That must have been some ride from your
Oh,
ship
it was.
to the hospital and the sights that you saw.
Well, I went through the main bedroom area there, and you could hear crying and awful sounds, and I think the worst thing of all was I went by and the kid was calling for his mother. It just was unbelievable.